Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Holocaust Center for Humanities Lunch and Learn program. My name is Richard Green, and I'm the Museum and Technology Director at the Holocaust Center for Humanity. I'm filling in for Alana Cohn-Kennedy, who is on vacation today. A live transcript for this program is available on Zoom. Click Live Transcript at the bottom of the screen, and then click Show Subtitles. Thank you to our 2021 Lunch and Learn series sponsors who help make these programs possible: Tacoma Jewish Community Fund, Home Street Bank, Verizon, and the Francis Roth and Stanley R. Schill Foundation. Today's Lunch and Learn program is titled Remembering Felicia, the son of an Auschwitz survivor shares her story, with Matthew Ehrlich, a member of the Holocaust Center Speakers Bureau. Matthew has been a member of our Bureau for almost 9 years. He was one of the earliest of our pioneering legacy speakers who, together with Holocaust survivors on the Speakers Bureau, volunteer their time to share their relatives' Holocaust experiences. Matthew has shared Felicia's story, especially in the South Puget Sound community, with many schools and students, as well as community groups and synagogues. Working in public affairs with the State of Washington Department of Labor and Industries, Matthew has also presented for his colleagues with the state. Matthew, we are so grateful for you and what you do. During this tumultuous year, one that has seen the COVID pandemic continue to ravage society, hearing Holocaust testimony like Felicia's makes our own appreciation for what we do have all the more vital and powerful. 2021 marks 80 years since Felicia was forced into the Krakow ghetto merely because she was Jewish. Her survival through the 4 harrowing years that followed before her liberation from Bergen-Belsen concentration camp are testament to her good fortune, resilience, and strength. We could all use a bit of Felicia's strength this December. With that, I'd like to cede the virtual stage to Matthew. Thank you so much for being with us today. I will turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out during this busy holiday season to hear about the Holocaust. Also, thank you to the sponsors for the Lunch and Learn series. It's, again, an honor to be able to speak with you today. With that said, let's start the presentation. Usually, what I talk to people about is, at this point, is trying to remember good times they've had with extended family members, grandparents, uncles, aunts, because that's something important as we recall, especially as I recall, Felicia's account of her Holocaust experiences. With that said,
hello, good morning.
That's Felicia Ehrlich. She passed away about a dozen years or so ago. She suffered from stage 4 lung cancer. Doctors gave her 6 months to live, and she survived another 6 years, which by the end of this presentation will probably not come as a surprise to you or anyone. But Felicia Lewkowicz was born June 21st, 1924. And you can see her in this photo at the far left. She was one of 7 siblings. In the middle of this photo is her eldest sister, Lola, who plays an important part in this story as we move forward. This, of course, is in 1929. Born in Krakow, she remembers receiving gifts for the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, and of course, being a 5-year-old. So here is another photo, and there's Felicia in the front row to the right. She's all of 9 years old in this picture. 1933, of course, in Germany, Hitler has taken power. In this photo is an important person. That's Helsha in the middle there. She is a nanny who was with the Ehrlichs for many, many years. And because she was Christian, my family celebrated many of the Christian holidays besides the Jewish ones. Also, she spoke Polish. And so my family spoke Polish, although most families, Jewish families in Poland, spoke Yiddish. If you're unfamiliar with Yiddish, it's a smattering of a variety of languages: Hebrew, German, a whole bunch of others. You've used Yiddish when you've been speaking, whether you know it or not. If you've had a glitch on your computer, if you've ever received a tchotchke, you're speaking Yiddish. So congratulations. They loved Helsha. She was really a real, for Felicia, except for her family, Helsha was, for all practical purposes, a part of the Lewkowicz family. Here's a photo from 1937. We know it's at least taken prior to 1938 because in that year, both Helsha, who's at the far left, and Zygmunt Lewkowicz, who's the gentleman in the hat, and my mother's father, pass away in 1938. In the middle of the photo, you see Rosalia Lewkowicz. That's my mother's mother. And she worked as for another family as sort of a nanny, while of course Helsha was a nanny for the Lewkowicz family. Zygmunt worked as a woodworker, something of a carpenter, in Krakow. You don't see Lola in this picture because by this time she has gone to Paris. The story is she eloped, but the other story the other account that's given is that she went to be a student in Paris. In any case, she is not in this particular photo. What is important to understand is, of everyone in the photo you just saw, the only person to survive World War II is Felicia. And that's what the Holocaust did to me and my family. All those people, all those memories you may have of grandparents, aunts, uncles, I don't have any experience with. And this is what the Holocaust, the cost of the Holocaust, I guess I would say. That said, the war begins and the Krakow ghetto is formed. Many families are put together in single apartments. Felicia has a single dress and she remembers washing it, which gets rid of a lot of the lice except for the eggs. And so there's just lice everywhere. You can see here are people gathering wood because they need the fuel. And here's what Felicia had to say about it. In playing this audio, you might want to turn up your volumes. Oh, sorry, 1 second. My fault.
You had to have all the time the certain stamps you had to go from time to time to make sure that your job is important, that you could stay there. Otherwise, you are going with the transport. And when you went when you went on the transport, you never came back, and nobody knew where the transport was going. Well, the thing is, eventually they learn only too fast, but not soon enough where they were going.
So Felicia had the opportunity, the paperwork, to actually work outside the ghetto. And so and we believe she was working as a maid. And here's what else happened.
We actually, we didn't get the permit. So my mother and everybody went to Tarnow, and me too. And I just couldn't be without my brother because I love him so much and I worry about him. See, they were dividing families from the start.
So the Nazis, of course, were splitting up families. Felicia stays in the Krakow ghetto, which you can see there on the left. Tarnow is about 70 miles or so from Krakow, and that's what it looks like there. Also, you can see the Jewish star, and what I have for you, let's see if we can do this. Oh, let's see if we can do this. What I'd like to show you is this is a Jewish star that my Aunt Lola wore. It says Juif, of course, in French, as opposed to Juden. And this is what the star that the Jews were forced to wear around wear at all times. You can see more or less its size there. Felicia was going to work every day until she finally decided to leave. And she didn't tell anyone. She just decided to go. She got on a train and was going to go to Vienna. Why Vienna? We're not entirely sure, except to say that she had a friend, and it didn't mean a good friend. It meant like an acquaintance, and so she was going to go there. When she's on the train, there's of course a conductor, and he's coming for tickets. And of course, she has no papers at all. And she turned to some Nazi soldiers and asked them to hide her. And they did. Why they did, we don't know. Maybe she was an attractive young girl. Maybe they were thinking it was a funny joke. But they decided to hide her. And to Vienna she goes. When she goes to Vienna, she arrives. Oh, and we're not entirely sure when she went, of course, because she didn't get a ticket or anything. She has said in the past that she was on her own for about a year, which, working backward, puts her leaving the Krakow ghetto around August of 1943. Which is confirmed by some of the other information we know about the rest of her family. So she arrives in Vienna and changes her name to Stephanie Hare, and starts working as a maid at the Hungarian King Hotel. And she works there for a time. But what happens is a boyfriend comes and he is collecting clothes for Polish partisan fighters. He is arrested and has her photo with him. And of course, the Nazis want to find Felicia. So Felicia manages to hear about this and leaves the hotel. And at that point, she's living on the street. She has no friends. She has no one to live with. She's living in cars. She's essentially a homeless person. She does have the advantage of speaking Polish, however, and manages to find a job at another hotel, staying with a family. And this indeed is the Astoria Hotel where she worked. By this time, she had changed her name again to Stephanie Hare, and she's able to pass as a Christian because she can go to church, she knows the prayers, she knows the holidays from having grown up with Helsha. It is sadly here where she is found and arrested. She recalls the owner of the hotel telling her, being very calm with her, of course, and telling her they're there. And she repeats this story a lot. And because it really is a moment of empathy when going east, people understood to mean certain death. So Felicia gets on a train and arrives at Auschwitz. Here's our, what I usually tell students when I give this presentation is, here's our geography lesson for today. You can see Auschwitz-Birkenau, where she was taken. Of course, there's Italy, France, Spain, Germany. And from there, later in our story, she will be taken to Bergen-Belsen, where she will be for the rest of the war. So, and of course, there are some of the other killing centers throughout Germany.
You can't give the proper background or proper things how it was, because the stench alone. Now, how could you put a stench on a film with the BME, with the urine, and you are sleeping on it and under it and things, and one on top of another and things?
So Felicia indeed arrives at Auschwitz. She talks about the initial selection. Of course, everyone is told to strip. And she's told by someone that she should make sure to be on the left and not the right. And she manages to convince the person there that she's strong, and she arrives on the left side. Of course, we know what happens to the people on the right-hand side. They go to the showers where indeed they are killed with the Zyklon B gas. Felicia also talks about when she arrived at Auschwitz, they started taking her blood. And I don't mean it like we give blood today, we get cookies and all of that. What they were doing was draining her because of her blood type. And a nurse who was an inmate herself manages to come by and change her blood type so that apparently they decide not to take her blood. Of course, they were using the Jewish blood to help Nazi soldiers wounded in battle. And so she survives that. Also, the nurse gives her food so that she is strong enough to continue. What you of course see here is a photo from the, I believe this is from the US Holocaust Museum. This is a barracks in Auschwitz. Felicia always said you were lucky to be on the top because, of course, as people got weaker or suffered various illnesses, they didn't have the strength to get up and often had to go to the bathroom where they were. We do know Felicia arrived well, she says she arrived in August of 44. The Nazis, being excellent record keepers, have her block of numbers arriving on September 2nd, 1944. So in any case, she is indeed in Auschwitz.
I remember when I came to Auschwitz, it was a plain summer when they took me to Auschwitz, and it was very hot, and I was given a woolen dress for which I really didn't I thought, my gosh, it's such a hot day and things. And then later I was grateful that I had that dress, because when the days came, and what they were doing, they all also, if you didn't have the uniform, they painted one streak on the back of your dress red dress, so you could not run away because everybody would know that you are the prisoners. You couldn't anyway run away from no concentration camp. It was you know, miracle if somebody ran away. When they caught him, they hung them publicly, and they were cases like that. There was absolutely not hope. As a matter of fact, I was praying so ardently in any language, in any faith, in Catholic faith, in Jewish faith, things. I was praying. I only wanted the chimney to stop burning because it was going day and night for weeks and weeks, and transport after transport was going straight to the gas chamber. And you always were thinking, my gosh, that could be my mother, my sister, my friend. It was so close because they were very, you know, they are rectangular things, and the stench was terrible. But when you saw that fire, it was not smoke coming out of the chimney. Only when it was totally dark and we stood on roll call for hours from 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock noon, you have seen the whole sky red, and like those people were flying out. Well, you saw them going up to, at that time I saw, up to heaven.
So soon after Felicia arrives, the Americans, the Allied forces, had by this point been able to advance far enough that they could launch bombing missions. And indeed, we know that Birkenau, a factory near Birkenau, is bombed. And Felicia also prayed for the bombs to drop on Auschwitz just to end everything. For years, when I was growing up, I didn't believe it. I thought, of course, the Americans would do whatever they could to end this sort of suffering. Well, of course, we know that Roosevelt, the President Roosevelt, decided not to do that. That from his perspective, the fastest way to end the Holocaust was to win the war. As a result of all of this, Felicia was not a particularly religious person, although if you met her, you'd of course say that she's a typical Jewish mother, I guess. So this is her number, A-25049. I took this photo while she was undergoing chemotherapy. This is where I paused because, of course, Felicia was a master of Holocaust humor. And so when I took this photo, I recall her looking at me and saying, well, look, after I'm gone, why don't you just cut it out and frame it? It'll be just fine. You'll be able to have it then. And I said, no, I'm happy with just the photo. In another case, of course, as we all know, when undergoing chemotherapy, they do take a lot of blood. And she went in to get a blood draw, and there was a 19-year-old, you know, a young teenager anyways, kind of chewing gum, and she was a nurse, and she goes, you know, unrolls the sleeve and says, oh, Mrs. Ehrlich, what a cool tattoo. Where did you get that? And of course, I'm hearing this and I know what's going to happen next. And what happens next is, of course, an older nurse comes and takes the younger nurse to another room and does the rest of the procedure. Felicia, of course, apologizing all the way, but there it was. So that indeed is her number. It's there you go. And so she is waiting. She hears that she's going to be put on a transport, which usually means that you're going to be taken someplace to be killed. The same nurse who helped her before tells her that no, she's going to be going to Bergen-Belsen. So she's waiting outside the barracks. They're doing a count, and she hears her name, and it turns out she finds a friend from Krakow, Estia, and her sister, and they manage to go together to Bergen-Belsen. Well, of course, being in the cattle cars is as you'd expect. There are several hundred people shoved into the cars, and she recalls, of course, that she was fortunate because she was near sort of the door, and there was a hole where she could get some fresh air. And of course, there was one pot, for people who needed to go to the bathroom. Of course, many people are dying on the cattle cars as they're taken to Bergen-Belsen. We know, she says she arrived in October of 1944. We know from accounts that indeed there was a train from Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen that arrived October 18th with about 2,000 or so inmates. And she says that she was taken to a part of the camp where there was just tents. And we know that she arrived before November, early November, because it was at that time that a storm occurred and destroyed much of the tents and all of that. And so they had to do some rebuilding. And what you're going to hear now is audio of Felicia talking about when she arrived and then Bergen-Belsen toward the end. So here we go.
In Bergen-Belsen, at first, it was a very, very nice camp. There were no the gas chambers, there were no crematoriums, so people were not afraid anymore that they are going to be selected. In Bergen-Belsen, there was a pile of people. They were burying by hundreds of thousands, 10,000 grave or mass graves, and the SS and the SS women had to drag those dead bodies, from the huge mountain of the people, and every day they were taking them out because they were the stench was so terrible in the barracks. The people urinated, people slept on top of another in the extreme. What you call the bowel movements and
excrement.
Excrements, and it was just the most horrifying things. When you came into the barracks, you just took one air and you became dizzy and you fainted. It was so bad, and the whole camp was so terrible. I never have seen, even Auschwitz was not so terrible like Bergen-Belsen, that the British who liberated the camp, they burned it down, a whole camp, and took us to other adjoining things. They
Tell
took
me.
So Bergen-Belsen started out as a POW camp, and by 1944, as the war was coming to an end, it was becoming the place where more and more concentration camp victims were being taken. When she arrived, by the records that were kept, we know there were about 6,000 or so people in Bergen-Belsen. By the time of the British liberation, the most agreed upon number is about 60,000 were in the same camp. And when the British arrived, of course, there were some 10,000 bodies strewn about the camp. Felicia tells stories about when the piles of bodies, as they were piling up, you would walk by and they would sometimes move because not everybody was dead yet. She also talks about at one point she bumps into the camp commandant, Kramer, and she's forced to stand outside in the snow without any shoes. And people are coming by trying to put pieces of clothing under her feet. She, of course, told people that she was so angry that she didn't need anything. it's important to understand that toward the end as well, there were simply not much in the way of food being handed out. And people were turning into Musulmen, which were essentially living skeletons weighing no more than 80 pounds, if that.
Actually, she saved my life because I didn't want it to live anymore.
So Felicia, around February or so, suffers from typhus. And typhus, of course, is spread by by bugs. And she also talked about starting to lose some of her teeth, which of course would be a sign of scurvy, again, because of the lack of food. Although ever since that time, Felicia always had lemons in her refrigerator, because that's what she always dreamed of having when she was in the camp. So Estia forces Felicia to remain alive. Sadly, Estia's sister passes away in the camp. You may know Bergen-Belsen more for an even more famous inmate, Anne Frank, and her sister Margot. They both die, at least according to accounts, somewhere around March. The British arrive at April 5th, well, arrive on April 15th, 1945. And even after they arrive, there is about a 1 in 4 chance of dying after their arrival. Initially, they supply food that the people who hadn't eaten for a long time couldn't stomach, and were dying. There are journalist accounts of interviewing people who drop dead as you're speaking to them. If you're interested, you can go on YouTube, and there are 2 films. The Relief of Belsen is a 2007 film that is something of an account of the British effort to relieve Bergen-Belsen. Another film, it's a documentary called Night Will Fall, that was done in 2014, and it talks about the British effort to document what had happened in Bergen-Belsen. And you can find both of those online. Felicia and many of the other Polish Jews are essentially stateless. She doesn't want to go back to Poland, and instead goes to Lingen. This would be in late May. We know this because of the records the British kept. And in Lingen, which is near the Dutch border, she meets a couple of soldiers. The accounts are a little difficult, but we think one of them was a gentleman named Arthur Ehrlich, who was a lieutenant in the British Polish Brigade. Arthur was born in Krakow as well, and didn't know Felicia growing up because he went to England and was in England when the war started. He was studying chemistry to go into the family dyeing business. So he arrives and just happens to know that Lola has survived and is in Paris. And so this, by the way, you can see is her displaced persons card. And this is a document, of course, that we have of her at least being in Lingen. At any rate, Felicia realizes that, okay, I'm going to Vienna, and excuse me, to Paris. And so she hitchhikes across Europe to arrive at Paris, where she meets up with Lola. She becomes a student. Here's her student body card. And she is studying sewing. And of course, staying with Lola. There she is. There, of course, at the beach. Lola is holding Danielle, who is a cousin of mine, now in his 70s, I think. And when I tell him I'm showing, nude pictures of him basically around the state, I'm not sure he's entirely happy, but he seems to be okay with it. This was one of the happier times in Felicia's life. And it turns out that Arthur Ehrlich does indeed marry Felicia Lewkowicz on July 3rd, 1948. And it's at that point where they go from, and there's Arthur there in the picture on the right. He was born in 1921, so he's all of 27 years old there. Kind of a dashing young man, I guess. Felicia in the picture on the left is pregnant with who will be my eldest brother, Richard. And they are immigrating to Canada, where they live in the Toronto area. Felicia has 4 children in Canada, one of whom dies in childbirth. And they decide then to go to the United States. They go to Minnesota, where I was born. And in fact, I'm the only member of my family born in the United States. So I guess that makes me the anchor baby, I guess. Arthur worked for Munsingware. Some of you may be able to remember Munsingware. It's their icon was a penguin, and he worked there until in 1967 they decide to move to California, and they moved to Monterey, California, where Arthur works as a chemist for a carpet manufacturing company. Sadly, in the early 1970s, they decide to divorce. Arthur, being old country, old school, wants Felicia to stay at home. Felicia wants to go out and see and do things. I recall growing up when during Shabbat, Friday night dinner, Arthur, being a conservative Jew, is reading a prayer that starts, "A woman of valor who can find, for her price is far above rubies." And from the kitchen, Felicia chiming in, "Rubies? I didn't get any rubies. Where are these rubies?" Of course, Arthur wasn't very happy with that. And they end up divorcing, and he ends up moving to Los Angeles and eventually Florida. Felicia, after the divorce, ends up becoming a banquet waitress for the next 25 years. This is her at one of the picnic events that was held. And she was very happy doing that. At the same time, she would spend a lot of her time kind of in her bed, watching TV, curtains closed, because she suffered from severe depression. In fact, we have the documents from some of the psychologists who treated her, who in the early 60s were describing her as incapable of having a relationship with her children. She was suffering clearly from nightmares. I remember growing up when she would, like any mother, say, take a jacket, but she'd also say, "Here, take some food," and extra clothes, because in her mind, she was of the belief that I might not be coming back, that I would be captured by Nazis or something. So she, we all know today that she is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and she was just, she would help anyone with anything. If you needed a lift, if you needed food, clothing, whatever, she would do it. Woe to the person who would try to pay for her dinner because she just couldn't accept that. I recall one time we were driving to a dentist appointment and we were stopped by the police. And of course, she got a ticket. I recall Felicia responding very forcefully with the police officer. And in fact, she goes to court to contest the ticket. And you can imagine the judge who's just, who's hearing, of course, of Felicia's life, and eventually says, "Look, Mrs. Ehrlich, you're not planning on speeding again, are you?" And of course, she says no. And he says, "Okay, thank you. You're dismissed." So she really was of a strong character, I guess I would say. So for those, when I talk to young students, I say, here's our scorecard. On the right are Felicia's parents, Zygmunt and Rosalia, and her family. Everyone in red dies during the war. On the left is, if I was to tell Arthur's story, it'd be almost the same thing. Indeed, he only has a brother who survives. And of course, Felicia and Arthur have 4 children. Richard, who was a Superior Court judge in Alaska and is now retired, living in Nevada. Andrew is a concert violinist. Michael is a financial analyst, and then there's me. Sorry.
In United States, there is one thing: they don't know what war is. War is over there. It's not in here. And they don't have no idea. Our brave men are fighting and giving their life. But only here, the family feels, but not the Americans. It's like, it's over there. But if they would, the 901 show that when it comes close, it riles everybody up. So, but this is just a drop of water in the ocean. But to be tortured and to be starved and to be kicked and to be burned alive and things and so on, nobody knows.
So Felicia would say that usually at the end of the presentations she would give, that really there are a couple of important things. One is we know where hatred and prejudice lead. It leads to Holocaust, and that you should never be of a feeling that you're better than someone or someone is better than you. I recall in elementary school seeing a bully beating up on someone, and I went, of course, to fight the bully. Sadly, I wasn't much of a fighter then, and I ended up getting beat up. But Felicia taught that you don't stand for that kind of injustice, and you question authority. It's probably one of the reasons I became a newspaper reporter, was as a result of what Felicia taught. All that said, that's at least the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take whatever questions that you might have, and I'll stop sharing. And if you have questions, I'm happy to respond if I can.
Well, thank you, Matthew. She sounds like such a remarkable woman, and what a remarkable story. And I invite all the people watching to, you can type your questions into the chat, or there's the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. So if you send us some questions, I'm sure Matt would love to ask you, but we do have a few questions already for you, Matthew. I'm curious, at what point did you learn your mother's story? How much did she talk about it when you were a child?
That's a great question. It turns out that I always recall knowing about the Holocaust. There were some books that Felicia had that were in Polish or French or in English that showed graphic images of the Holocaust, whether it was prior to the war or during the war. And so I always remembered, I always remember knowing about it. Felicia would only talk about it in, I'll say, small pieces. Um, I recall her one time, my wife and daughter were visiting. My daughter was an infant, and she was singing a lullaby and then turned to us and said, I recall when the Nazis were taking babies and smashing their heads against walls. So there were just moments like that where it would occur. Uh, and you know, or I would have, I would be wearing a short sleeve shirt, and she would start playing with the hairs on my forearm because that's what she did with her father. And she would start recalling stories then as well. So it's really been a lifetime of collecting her account and trying to put it into this form.
Story of how she escaped the ghetto and fled to Vienna is quite remarkable and unusual, actually. Do you know any more details on that? How was she able to do that, especially with no papers? How long did she survive in Vienna in hiding and on the streets there, and how did she do it?
Well, that's another good question. There's not as much that we know because there wasn't really any of this documented. We do know that in her account, she was out there for about a year. And so by that reckoning, we know about when she left the ghetto. Her talking about leaving the ghetto was that once she was out, there was one day where she just decided she wasn't going to come back and didn't tell anyone because, of course, that would put them in danger. And so she just got on the train. Now, where she got documents for her pseudonyms, we don't know that either. So there's a lot more we don't know about that than what we do, except to say that what we know of the records of people arriving into Auschwitz was that that's from where she was coming.
And question from Pamela. Are there any more details on what happened to her brother, Felicia's brother, who she went to the Krakow ghetto with? She left him behind in the ghetto and never heard from him again.
Right. Well, we know what happens to the Krakow ghetto. It gets liquidated, and whether same with the Tarnow ghetto, and whether they died in the ghetto, whether they died at a work camp, or whether they died at Auschwitz. The answer is the same. He was killed, and we don't know where the family is. And that would go for Arthur's family as well. So there's simply no way of knowing. The likelihood of there being in some mass grave somewhere seems pretty high, but we don't know where they are.
Oh, I see it in the chat from Mike Ehrlich that she had a pass. That Felicia had a pass to work outside the ghetto, and that's what she told him.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Mike. Good. My brother is watching.
It's good. Yes. The story of the nurse also is quite remarkable. Any more details on this nurse? Was this a Jewish nurse?
Yes. So
non-Jewish?
she was wearing a black triangle, and we know from study that the triangles all had different meanings. So she was indeed an inmate. Why she took such a liking, a caring for Felicia, we don't know. And what happened to her afterward, we don't know either. So you know, there are these moments where it's the same with the Nazi soldiers. It's the same with her learning Christian prayers. These things happen, and you know, it shows, I guess, her level of good fortune.
Lexi on Facebook asks, you mentioned she often shared bits and pieces of her testimony growing up. Did she, and she shared her testimony. So the audio you have is from an interview.
Yes.
Was that you asking the questions? And then the video, I believe we have it at our center, correct?
Yes. So there are, so Felicia, the video that you saw was from an interview my brother Andrew did in preparing a concert with some of the lullabies and other songs that Felicia learned growing up. And while she was talking about that, she would talk about her Holocaust experiences. The audio you heard was from an interview she gave to the radio station where I worked at in Ephrata, KULE, Cooley Country. And when I worked there as a reporter for the Columbia Basin Herald, this would be in the mid 1980s. And you can, of course, hear how remarkably consistent her accounts are between the two documents, and which I think add a lot to her, of course, credibility. So that's where those pieces of information come from. There are a variety of other books. No surprise, the scholarship on the Holocaust is deep and wide. And there are a variety of books, certainly on Bergen-Belsen, that provide a lot of the information regarding the dates of Felicia's arrival and what happened after liberation.
A couple questions about languages. Do you know how many languages your mom spoke? And you said she spoke Polish. Obviously, she's from Poland, but they spoke Yiddish at home. Do you know whether she learned her Polish, or did they speak Polish at home, I guess? And did you know if she learned her Polish at school? Because I know that a lot of girls in particular went to Polish schools rather than yeshiva. And that's where and this learning Polish actually gave them a leg up in surviving.
Well, she knew a lot of languages: Ukrainian, German, Polish, Yiddish, a variety of French, a variety of languages. And I'm not exactly sure whether she indeed went to public school in Poland, I guess I'll say, as opposed to a yeshiva. But clearly in the Lewkowicz family, they spoke Polish, and that helped her skate or slide by, if you will, when she was in situations, whether in Vienna or elsewhere, where she could act Polish, if you will, and Christian, as opposed to speaking Yiddish and being immediately identified as a Jew.
Hmm. And what happened to your Aunt Lola? What was her fate?
Well, I'm smiling because Felicia, of course, loved Lola tremendously. I recall as a young child, Lola was visiting us in Monterey, and I was trying to compliment my aunt, you know, by saying she was attractive and that anyone on Alvarado Street would be glad to be with you. Well, in Monterey at that time, Alvarado Street was kind of the red light district. And I didn't quite understand what I was saying, but my mother certainly did. And Felicia came at me and was starting to whap me into next week. And I, of course, didn't understand what was happening or what I said. And Lola explained it to Felicia, who stops hitting me and then bursts out into laughter. And what that taught me was Felicia's loyalty, not only to Lola, but to her friends, was off the scale. That is to say, she was extremely loyal. And that was another lesson that she taught. Lola suffered from Alzheimer's and passed away in Paris, where she had lived since before the war. So that's what happened to Lola.
I have a couple questions from Rick, and Rick, we'll do both of them. First off, regarding Felicia's arrest at the Hotel Astoria while posing as a Christian, how was she found out? Do you know?
We don't have the exact story, except to say that clearly the photo that was discovered with her boyfriend started to give the Nazis a lead, if you will, and she was found out. We don't have many more details than that.
And how did Estia save her?
Well, if you were with someone in the camp and working together, your chances of survival increased. Now, we don't know exactly where Estia worked. We think Felicia worked indoors as cleaning offices in the camps, which would have also helped her survival. We think Estia worked in the kitchen, which was, you can imagine, a plum assignment. So they were able to save food, which they would give to Estia's sister. And when suffering from typhus, of course, Estia was yelling at Felicia, trying to make her angry so that she would have the strength to keep moving. And that's how it was done. There was certainly no medical treatment available. And if you went to the hospital, that was your entry to death, because it would be likely that you would be taken, whether to gas chambers or otherwise killed.
You know, a few people have commented on the irony and the absurdity that her Jewish blood was good enough for wounded Nazis, but of course, you know, was the cause of her persecution and incarceration as well. Yeah, that's also, I haven't heard that story before of blood being taken for Nazi soldiers. So one last question before we wrap things up. Despite, this is from Marty on Zoom, Martin, despite her PTSD in later age, was Felicia able to experience moments of genuine happiness and fulfillment too?
I would like to believe yes, but I fear the answer is no. I think she could act really well, and she understood people really well. When we would go to the airport or anywhere, she would invariably be able to identify the person who could help her most. And that was, of course, another life skill that she learned in the camps. I think that when I would sit with her, when we would be watching TV, you know, she would fall asleep or whatever. I think she had a tremendously strong character and a strong public face. But you know, Felicia that I knew also was kind of tired and didn't really have the strength to keep down the memories of what happened in the Holocaust. So when there were terrible things like 9/11 that she refers to and other things, I'm pretty sure that brought up the past memories as well. So I think, you know, when she went to my brother Andrew and my brother Michael's weddings, I think, you know, clearly there were moments where she smiles and it's genuine, but she suffered from depression, and a very serious depression, which, as you've seen, is no surprise given her life experience.
Well, I'm sure she also would have been very proud of you and you're telling her story and the work that you're doing on her behalf. And we at the Holocaust Center are very grateful and appreciative of what you do in sharing her story today and sharing it as a member of our Speakers Bureau. So sorry, we're out of time. More questions and praise for you are coming in. I'll send you that. But thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us today and for sharing your mother's story.
You're more than welcome. I'm sorry, I have to just chime in. I see the last question from Carrie, and I would only say that she would, of course, say if you liked this presentation, then go out and help. Make sure to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. Make sure to feed people. She would be very much toward taking action. Thank you.
Those great words to end with. So thank you, Matthew, so much for joining us today. So that concludes our program. And I thank also all the attendees who joined us today. This is our 77th Zoom Lunch and Learn, and my first as host. The program was recorded, and you'll find it on our website starting tomorrow. And a big thank you to the Holocaust Center staff, of course, to our CEO, Dee Simon, and our entire team, Alana Cohn-Kennedy, Jenna Sittman, Lori Warshel-Cohn, Paul Regelbrug, Julia Thompson, Morgan Romero, Amanda Davis, Katie Lawrence, Devin Charlocki, and Ali Laps. And all of us at the center wish you a safe and happy end to 2021. We look forward to having you join us in 2 weeks for the 5th installment of the Winter Lunch and Learn series with speaker and author Karen Traeger sharing the incredible story, and it is a truly incredible story, of her in-laws' survival during the Holocaust. Thank you, and this concludes our program for today.